vamos a comer?
¿Qué vamos a comer?
Tuyo. Lo que le sobra a los de arriba.
A group of travelers arrive at a village, hungry, carrying nothing but an empty cooking pot. The villagers are unwilling to share their stored food with the travelers, so they move to a nearby stream where they fill their pot with water, place it atop a fire, and drop a large stone in. Passing by, a villager becomes curious, asking what they're doing. They say that they're making stone soup, which is delicious, and they would be willing to share a portion with the villager if only they would provide some garnish. So, the villager provides a couple of carrots and they're added to the soup. Another villager becomes intrigued, providing an onion in exchange for their own portion. Villager after villager, intrigued, turns up contributing a negligible part of their food to the broth. In the end, the stone is removed and the nutrient-rich broth composed of countless parts is shared amongst all the villagers, filling up all their bellies. This is the old European folk tale of the stone soup, which clearly suggests that resources of many individuals can be combined to accommodate a collective, even if it requires a touch of deception. The recent Spanish film, The Platform, enacts the same questions of individualism or collectivism as the story of the stone soup, albeit in reverse, amid a grotesquely dark dystopian setting. Here, the meal has already been made. The proverbial villagers are now inmates of a vertical prison known as the Hole, with cells stacked upon one another, 2 people in each. The meal, in fact a royal class banquet, sits atop the eponymous platform, which begins at level 0 at the top, and descends down the numbered cells being ravaged by the inmates as it goes. Of course, with the faces, personalities, and bodies of those far below being far out of sight and out of mind, those at the top gorge on the meal, leaving absolutely nothing for those further down, forcing them to starve. We follow Gareng, who willingly admitted himself to the Hole in order to quit smoking and read Don Quixote, netting himself a measly accredited diploma in the process. For this analysis, we'll explore Gareng's time in the Hole chronologically, as his progression between levels and the people he encounters on each plays into the very themes the platform develops throughout the film. Initially presented straight up in its first line, there are 3 types of people: those at the top, those at the bottom, and those that fall. Gareng first wakes up on floor 48 to a bizarre elderly cellmate, Trimagasi, who teaches him the ropes of the Hole since he's been a resident for over a year. It becomes clear that at the end of every month, the pair will be moved to a new cell, shifting either up or down the literal food chain. More thematically, Trimagasi teaches Gareng that they must survive off the leftovers from the 94 people who sit above them, taking the dregs and slim pickings they choose to pass down. And when Gareng attempts to reason with those above and below, Trimagasi snaps.
Los de abajo, ¿me oís? Llame a los de abajo. ¿Por qué? Porque están abajo. Los de arriba no le contestarán. ¿Por qué? Porque están arriba.
The lay of the land Trimagasi outlines is a grim one, placing the inmates into an entirely arbitrary class system as they're placed randomly, which they all appear to take advantage of, glutting themselves at the top while ignoring and spitting on those below. But Gareng has the advantageous optimism of youth, rebutting his comments with,
Todo es muy obvio para usted, ¿verdad?
Clearly ready to suggest an alternative. He attempts to propose an idealist system of rationing to ensure that everyone could have their fair share, but he's ultimately accused of being a communist. It is clear that Trimagasi is a product of the system. He's lived by it, and regardless of what his original ideals were, now propagates the very destructive, alienating and dehumanizing classist ideology which stunts the opportunity for progress. To put it grotesquely, using the film's lingo, he's been shat on, so he shits on others, but Gareng isn't so easily convinced. The first move. Gareng and Trimagasi now wake up low down on level 171, and the half-eaten portions they receive on 48 seem like a waking dream, with not even the bones making it to this incredible depth. As such, Trimagasi straps Gareng to his bed, exclaiming that Gareng must sacrifice his own flesh to feed them both over this month, dehumanizing him and calling him a snail. Although Trimagasi blames the system and those above for these grim, cannibalistic circumstances, Gareng's ideals cannot permit such scapegoating, exclaiming,
Quiero que sepa que responsabiliza a usted, no a la gente que haya por arriba, no a las circunstancias, ni siquiera la administración.
But this scapegoating bleeds over into the real-world class systems, with each class below blaming those above or below, be it for legal or illegal activity. In the real world, this works upwards in blaming laws, the government, the economy, and large corporations, and downwards in blaming, most frequently, immigrants. Interestingly, Trimagasi holds this latter belief as well, revealing that the reason he's in the hole is because he became overwhelmed by consumer desire through advertising, that he threw his TV out his window, which landed on and killed a supposed illegal immigrant, who he blames for the crime. But through this scapegoating, no progress can ever be made, as it places each individual's locus of control, their perceived control of their lives, in other people's hands. Thus, if Trimagasi's system of scapegoating were to win, individuals would remain perpetually stuck in their class, unknowingly propagating the ideals of the system while simultaneously denouncing the system as the enemy. Fortunately, Garang, despite being strapped down as a human carving block, manages to retain his ideals. And just as his skin is being carved off for a meal, Miharu, a mysterious Asian woman supposedly looking for her child somewhere in the hole, jumps off of the descending platform and slices into Trimagasi's neck, and he becomes their dinner. The enemy that is political scapegoating has been slain. But with his cellmate dead, at the end of the month, when Garang finds himself in a new cell, he also finds a new cellmate. Imoguri, equipped with her pet dog, is in fact the woman who initially interviewed Garang, and, like him, has come into the hole on her own volition. Up in Kushi 33, where food is plentiful, things seem easy and she makes bold claims about the hole. As she's worked with the administration for 25 years, there's no reason to doubt what she says. She claims there are 200 levels at max, and that under 16s aren't allowed in the hole, casting a shadow over Miharu's actual motivations. But most importantly for us, she holds very strong socialist values, which align with Garang's. She touts the ideology of spontaneous solidarity, which should bring everyone together if given the right nudge. As such, she prepares individual meals for the people in 34, directly below, and begs that they do the same. In line with Trimagasi's ideologies, obviously, they refuse. They reject the idea not on a conceptual basis, but due to the fact that they were famished for the previous month on level 88. Needless to say, being stuck on level 171 and being strapped to the bed also took its toll on Garang, who questions her ideologies, which she coolly responds to with, But despite his month of hunger and cannibalism, he returns to his values. He takes a small portion at each meal, the communal spirit slowly revitalizing in him. However, with the two below still not sharing their rations, he forces it upon them with an ultimatum. Either they share the rations as described, or he will shit all over the food and ruin it for everyone below. With that, they reluctantly follow suit. But it casts a spanner in the pair's ideology. Spontaneous solidarity is turned into an enforced ideology, with the ruling class, given the fact that Garang and Imoguri are above them, thrusting the ideology on those below without any option but to obey, turning a socialist ideal into a dictatorial one. Not only that, but there's a further problem.
No, los de arriba no me escucharán. Porque no puedo cagar hacia arriba, señora.
Instead of solving the problem at its core, forcing everyone to share the meal from level 1, they can only enforce their rules on those below them, below the first 64 people. But even then, they can only really ensure that their direct neighbours and themselves follow this ration-driven step towards equality, as once the platform passes far enough out of sight and out of earshot, how are they to even know whether the ideal is being upheld? In short, by sitting firmly in the middle of the pack, the middle class if you will, and shouting upon those directly below them, it's almost impossible to instigate an entire change in the ideology of the whole. Waking up in the depths of 202, Garang finds that she has hung herself, but this isn't simply due to the unbearable burden that a month of starvation promises. Waking up on 202 proves that Imoguri's knowledge of the whole, and thus the entire system, is founded on lies. She was told that there were 200 rooms, but as they look below, the cells still continue as far as the eye can see. Her spirit, or at least Garang's hallucinated version of her, exclaims, trying to absolve herself of the guilt of spending 25 years ushering others into the hole. This suggests a whole lot more about Imoguri's character. After dedicating much of her life to the administration, only to find out the values and ideals she thought she was upholding were a complete facade, burrows to the core of classist systems, which rely on such people in the middle to believe in the class system, transmit its values through to the lower classes, and thus willingly subjugate them to the horrors of being considered below the others. That is not to say that Imoguri didn't hold her own ideals. Of course she did. She attempted to instigate spontaneous solidarity by starting the system of rationing. But lacking resolve, a strong will, and believing in the institutional lies that she has worked under for 25 years, her death comes to symbolize the tragedy of the middle classes, unable to make a difference because they believe in the system, but the system which they believe in is itself a lie. After making it through the darkest depths yet, Gareng wakes up on 6. He's met by Baharat, a man with a rope who's looking to get out. He begs those above to catch the rope and haul him up, but, obviously, because they're above, they literally shit on his plans. Thus, despite being a mere 5 levels from the top, he and Gareng decide to descend with the food, ensuring the safe passage of rations to those below, enacting the exact dictatorial communism he tried to instigate from 33. Speculating that there are 250 floors in depth, they skip the first 50 as they had gorged the previous day, and would gorge again tomorrow. They meet some of Baharat's friends in these first 50 levels who beg for special treatment, even attempting to manipulate him through racial discourse, but he holds fast, clubbing any of them who get near. But 2 questions quickly arise. Firstly, will instigating this change for one moment ensure it's maintained? In many ways, I would argue no. Gareng and Baharat rely wholly on dictatorial force, giving everyone the option to either comply or to do battle, enacting an ideological regime attempting to overthrow the top-down classist approach. Thus, their descent enacts a kind of Bolshevik revolution, which instills communist value but retains a ruling class, them. But even at this point, 2 classes still exist above. Those 5 floors above level 6 remain untouched, as well as the administration. So the second question arises, how can they send a message to the people above? A wise older inmate below suggests sending a message in the language the administration uses to communicate with them by retaining one dish in all its glory. Baharat selects the delicate white panna cotta, clutching it as they continue to descend.
Panna cotta es el mensaje.
The platform continues down past 200, past 250, and eventually stops at 333. They get off, finding Miharu's child hiding under the bed. But then the platform continues down even further, and it's impossible to know how many more lay dead below. As it descends into the decrepit darkness, the blight of the lower classes comes into stark focus. Considering severe starvation began somewhere after the first 100 floors, it is safe to assume that the rest are all dead and decaying, making it clear that this class structure can be analysed independent to the discrete upper, middle and lower classes, but also to the percentiles of each, with the top 10 levels at most receiving the upper class portion. After the platform passed level 250, it became eminently clear that there was not enough food to feed everyone, at least not a sustainable portion. So perhaps even the idea of communism or socialism here is one doomed to fail. How can you share resources when there isn't enough to share? Do you collectively starve yourself, or do you need to accept that there need to be sacrifices? Gareng accepts neither as an answer, drawing inspiration from his faithful companion book, Don Quixote. A great man who is sin-ridden can only be a great sinner. The wealthy man who is not generous will be a miserly beggar. The owner of wealth is not made happy by owning it, but by spending it, and not by spending it capriciously, but by knowing how to spend it well. Regardless of the apparent state of things, the message, the panna cotta, must be sent to the top. A message that suggests that those below are human enough to save and care for. But when met with a starving child, the only living soul for over 100 levels, their morals stare them in the face. What's more important, human life or the message they're trying to send? Sacrifice a life for the chance to change it all, or preserve that life for another week? Faced with this impasse, they fold, handing Miharu's child the panna cotta, preserving her life, livelihood, and future. But the message is not dead. The child can be the message. After all, the questions of inequality within class systems are human questions, not material ones. Perhaps a living, breathing message would surpass the message ever possible by a dessert. Thus the girl and Gareng clamber back onto the platform and descend, leaving Baharat, the warrior who fought valiantly for a cause he was convinced to believe in. They reach the bottom, a dark abyss, and anticipate the platform returning to level 0, now bearing the message. But Gareng is ushered away off the platform by the spirits of his dead cellmates. Trimagasi speaks the only wise words he utters in the entire film.
Pero usted no es el mensaje.
Pero soy su portador.
El mensaje no necesita ningún portador.
Gareng watches the platform shoot up, being forced to come to terms with the fact that no matter how hard he fought for the cause, it is not about him, and he may never see the change he has or has failed to instigate. And we, as we have been stuck with Gareng, remain with him for these last moments, never able to see whether the message made it to the top, or what the message provoked. This may seem bleak, but it is fundamental for long-term change. Of course, we all idealize the world and its systems to be a specific way. In Gareng's case, it was to share resources communally to ensure universal welfare, but we can only push the world in that direction. And by the end of our efforts, we may not see the world we envisage yet, but we can know that through our efforts, we are at least one step closer to them. Despite being hailed as a messiah, Garang is just a man who stuck to his ideals. Although experiencing the highs and lows of each rank in the tiered class system, his commitment to the fundamental ideals was unwavering, and when he worked his way to the top, he finally took the leverage he had to instigate social change for the better. This, of course, reflects the climb many people have through the capitalist system, spending most of their livelihoods struggling to reach the upper classes, and only then, when their ideals have been battered and bruised, do they have the leverage to dictate and force social change onto others. We're of course left with the question here, who are the chefs on floor zero, and who is the man who leads them, striving for perfection and punishing those who fail to achieve it? I'll leave this one for you to decide, as ultimately, I think in the platform, the importance is that a higher power does exist, and one we cannot and do not truly understand. A token of the cult of personality, which we experienced in Bong Joon-ho's Snowpiercer. In all, the platform is not a critique of communism or capitalism alone, but instead is a critique of class structure wherever it's found, where the communist-style banquet fit to feed many of the inmates is gobbled up by those on the first few floors. This enacts the tragedy of the commons, where individual users exploit a shared resource system for their own interest, behaving contrary to the common good. We can most certainly use it to fuel upward critique of capitalist class structures or dictatorial communism, along with all other sources which lead to divisions of class. But director Galder Gaztelu-Urrutia says it best himself. You can look above you and think that the people up there should be doing much more, but then you look down and see that there are many levels below yours. The question is, what am I going to do from where I am to fight this selfish structure that runs throughout our society and species? With that having been said, that's all for today, folks. Don't forget to hit subscribe and click the notification icon to stay up to date on all my content, and if there's anything else you'd like to request, please don't hesitate to ask. As always, it's been a pleasure. Niyat here with Film Comics Explained. Thanks for stopping by.
Esta vez sigan mis instrucciones porque sin duda bajo vuestros pies están muriendo personas.
O hacéis exactamente lo que dice la señora o me voy a cagar en vuestra comida todos los días.